The night I finally broke down and called my parents, I had exactly $4.73 in my bank account. Not $400. Not 40. $4.73, and rent was due in 6 days. My name is Diane. And for 3 years, I had been quietly drowning while everyone around me assumed I was swimming just fine. I was 21 years old, a junior at a university that had promised me the world and delivered me a bill I couldn't read without my hands shaking. My partial scholarship covered a portion of tuition, barely, but it said absolutely nothing about textbooks, about housing, about the broken laptop I had been nursing with a cracked screen and a prayer, or the meals I had been skipping 3 times a week, because the campus food pantry always ran out by Thursday afternoon. I was living in a shared off-campus apartment with 2 roommates who had parents who wired money on the first of every month like clockwork, like breathing, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched them order takeout without checking the price. I watched them buy new shoes for an event happening in 3 weeks. I watched them complain about their parents sending only $500 that particular month. As if $500 wasn't what I was trying to piece together from loose change, skipped lunches, and overtime tutoring shifts just to keep a roof over my head. I smiled and said nothing. Because that is what pride does to a person. It builds a wall around your suffering, paints it a pleasant color, and calls it dignity. But that Tuesday night, sitting on the cold bathroom floor at 11:47 p.m. with the faucet running, so my roommates couldn't hear the way my breathing had gotten unsteady, I decided the wall had to come down. I needed help. Not motivational words. Not someone to tell me I was strong. I needed actual, real, tangible financial help. And there was only one place I had never gone looking for it, because I had always assumed it would simply be there when I needed it most. Home. I picked up my phone and I called my parents. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. In the background, I could hear the evening news playing at its usual volume, the familiar clink of dishes being stacked in the drying rack, the sound of a house that operated in its comfortable routines without any awareness that its daughter was sitting on a bathroom floor at midnight, trying not to fall apart completely. I almost hung up. My thumb hovered over the red button for 2 full seconds. Instead, I pressed the phone harder against my ear, and I said the words I had rehearsed in my head for 3 weeks. Mom, I'm really struggling. I need help with tuition and living expenses. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this alone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Longer than a pause should ever be between a mother and her child. The kind of pause that has weight. The kind that tells you a decision is being made in real time about how to respond to you. Then she called my father to the phone. What happened in the next 4 minutes would take me 9 full years to completely understand. And what they said was something I never, in my darkest and most pessimistic imaginings, expected to hear from the 2 people who were supposed to be my foundation. My father's voice came on the line. It was calm, measured. The exact tone he used when he had already decided something before the conversation started. A tone that left no room for negotiation or appeal. He said, "Diane, we raised you to be independent. You chose that school. You figure it out." I waited for the pivot. The but. They of course will support you. However, here's what we need from you first. I waited for the door to open even slightly. It never did. Not even a crack. My mother's voice returned, softer but equally final. "We believe in you, Diane. You're strong. You'll manage. You always do." The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know this because I stared at the screen after they disconnected, watching that frozen timer like it was as stunned as I was. For minutes and 11 seconds to dismantle every assumption I had carried about what family meant when things got genuinely hard. I sat on that bathroom floor until the cold tiles left impressions in my knees that lasted until morning. And in that silence, somewhere between devastation and something harder and quieter, I made a decision. A decision that felt in that moment like surrender but would turn out, 9 years later, to be the most powerful choice I ever made in my life. What I chose to do the next morning would set off a chain reaction so significant, so far-reaching, that nobody in my family, including me, could have predicted where it would eventually lead. But before I tell you where it led, you need to understand exactly what the morning after that phone call looked like. Because that morning was where everything truly began. I want you to understand something about real desperation, not the performative kind, not the social media kind with aesthetic lighting and inspirational captions. Real desperation is quiet. It is methodical. It doesn't have the luxury of being dramatic because it is too busy solving the next problem just to survive the next 7 days. The morning after that phone call, I woke up with swollen eyes and a strange, cold clarity that I had never felt before. Something had shifted overnight. The part of me that had been waiting for rescue, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for circumstances to soften. That part went quiet. And in its place rose something sharper, something that didn't ask for permission. If no one was coming to save me, I was going to have to save myself. And I was going to do it so completely, so thoroughly, that one day the story of this bathroom floor would become something other than just a wound. I took out a notebook, a yellow spiral one I had been using for chemistry notes, and I flipped to a blank page. I made 2 columns. One column was labeled resources I haven't used yet. The other was labeled reasons I haven't used them. Almost every item in column 2 said the same thing: pride. I had been too proud to walk into the financial aid office and admit I was drowning. Too proud to apply for the emergency student fund because it felt like charity. Too proud to pursue the paid research assistant position in the sociology department because I had convinced myself I wasn't qualified enough, when the real truth was that I was terrified of rejection on top of everything else. That morning, I applied for everything in column 1. Within 72 hours, I had 2 callbacks. The sociology department invited me to interview. The student emergency fund approved a one-time disbursement of $600. Enough to cover rent and keep the electricity on for 1 more month. I sat across from a financial aid counselor named Mrs. Patterson, and I told her the truth about my situation without softening a single detail. She slid a box of tissues across the desk without making it a moment. Then she handed me a printed list of external scholarships specifically for first-generation students, for women in underserved circumstances, for students maintaining high GPAs under financial hardship, scholarships that nobody had ever sat me down and told me existed. That list changed the entire trajectory of my life. Over the following 8 months, I applied for 31 scholarships. I was rejected from 24 of them. I won 7. Combined, those 7 awards totaled just over $14,000. I did not celebrate when the last notification arrived. I did not call home. I transferred the funds, updated my spreadsheet, and kept moving. I tracked every dollar I spent in that yellow notebook with a precision that bordered on compulsive. I meal prepped every Sunday for the week ahead. I wore the same rotation of 4 outfits, and told myself I had developed a capsule wardrobe. I worked my tutoring position 16 hours per week. I worked the sociology research assistant role an additional 10 hours. I carried 21 credit hours per semester. I did not sleep well. I did not take vacations. I did not allow myself the softness of wondering whether any of this was fair. And I graduated on time, with a 3.87 GPA, with a full-time job offer already signed. With a small freelance consulting practice I had quietly started in my final semester. And with a bone-deep understanding that I was capable of things I had not yet begun to attempt. But here is what nobody tells you about surviving entirely on your own when you are young and brilliant and terrified and too stubborn to stop. It does something permanent to you. It builds a muscle in you that people who have always been comfortable will simply never develop. It teaches you to read every room before you walk into it, to find the angle, to create the opportunity that does not yet exist. It teaches you that the absence of a safety net doesn't necessarily make you fall. It can make you fly lower, faster, and with a precision that people who've always been caught will never fully understand. By the time I crossed the graduation stage, I had everything I needed to start a real life. But I had also built something invisible and dangerous around myself. A self-sufficiency so complete, so armored, that I had quietly stopped believing I needed anyone at all. And I hadn't invited my parents to the ceremony. I told myself it was logistics. Long drive. Expensive tickets. They hadn't asked about the date. But the truth I wouldn't fully admit until years later was simpler and sadder. I didn't know how to stand in that moment of triumph with them without the phone call standing between us like something that would never fully dissolve. They found out I graduated through a cousin who saw my photos on social media. My mother sent a text that read, "Congratulations. We always knew you could do it." I stared at that message for a long time. 7 words that somehow contained both genuine love and a complete failure to understand what those words cost in that particular moment. I put my phone face down and didn't respond for 3 weeks. When I finally did reply, I kept it brief and warm enough to avoid conflict and cold enough to protect myself. And what I was building in silence during those weeks, what I was quietly assembling in my professional world, was something my parents would not discover for years. And when they finally did discover it, the revelation would force a conversation that none of us were entirely prepared to survive intact. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The entry-level marketing consulting job I accepted out of college paid a modest salary. But I treated that job the way a doctoral student treats a research fellowship. I extracted everything it had to offer, and I gave back twice as much in return. I studied the senior consultants with the focus of someone who understood that attention was a form of currency. I volunteered for every project that nobody else wanted, the unglamorous accounts, the difficult clients, the presentations that needed to be rebuilt from scratch at 10 p.m. the night before the pitch. I stayed late not to perform dedication, but because I was genuinely, hungrily trying to understand how money moved through organizations, how businesses made decisions under pressure, how people with power communicated differently from people without it. Within 14 months, I had been promoted twice. My manager told me, during my second promotion meeting, that she had never seen anyone absorb institutional knowledge as quickly as I did. I smiled and thanked her, and didn't tell her that when survival has been your curriculum, you learn to learn fast. But the thing I was building on the side, that was the real story. During my senior year of college, somewhere between the third scholarship essay and the second tutoring shift of the week, I had started a blog. It wasn't grand in its ambitions at the beginning. It was just a quiet corner of the internet where I wrote honestly about personal finance for first-generation college students. For students who, like me, had no family architecture of financial knowledge to draw from. No parents who could explain what a W-4 was, or why contributing to a Roth IRA in your 20s mattered more than it felt like it did, or how to negotiate a salary offer when you'd been raised to be grateful for whatever you were given. I wrote about what I was learning in real time. The scholarships, the budgeting frameworks, the conversations with financial aid offices that nobody told you were actually allowed to have, and that could change your outcome entirely if you just knew to ask. The blog grew slowly. Then it grew less slowly. Then it grew in a way that I had not planned for, and had to learn to manage. By the time I was 24 years old, I had 40,000 monthly readers. By 25, I had a newsletter with 90,000 subscribers. Brands began reaching out about sponsored content. I was careful, deliberately, almost stubbornly careful, about every partnership I accepted, because the people reading my work were students who could not afford to be pointed in the wrong direction by someone they had trusted with their financial future. I turned down partnerships that didn't align. I answered questions in my inbox at midnight. I built the audience the same way I had built everything else in my adult life, slowly, without shortcuts, and with the kind of consistency that only comes from someone who has never had the option of giving up. At 26, I launched an online financial literacy course designed specifically for first-generation college students and recent graduates navigating financial systems their families had never mapped for them. I priced it at $47, accessible enough to reach the people who needed it most, substantial enough to reflect the genuine value inside it. In the first 48 hours of the launch, 1,200 students enrolled. I sat alone in my apartment at midnight on launch day, watching the enrollment notifications arrive one after another on my screen, and I thought about the bathroom floor. I thought about $4.73. I thought about 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I thought about "you'll manage, you always do," and how those words had once felt like abandonment and had somehow become the most accurate prediction anyone had ever made about me. I was now generating more revenue from my platform in a single month than my full-time salary paid in an entire quarter. I resigned from my job on a Tuesday afternoon, shook hands with everyone genuinely, and walked out into the same city that had always surrounded me. Except that the city looked exactly the same, and I was an entirely different person moving through it. And through all of it, every milestone, every launch, every late night, every moment I wanted to share with someone who would understand exactly how far I had traveled to get there, I had not told my parents a single thing. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't a plan. It was protection. A reflex. Every time a moment of success arose and I considered picking up the phone, my father's calm, measured voice would surface in my memory. "You chose that school, you figure it out." And something in me would close like a heavy door closing in a quiet house. So I figured it out. All of it. Alone. And the figuring out had become so completely fused with my identity that I no longer knew where self-reliance ended and isolation began. Which is exactly why what happened when I was 27 years old hit me with the force of something I had not braced for. I had just closed the most significant partnership of my career, a formal collaboration with a national nonprofit organization that would bring my financial literacy curriculum into 200 high schools across the country, reaching students who would never have found me on their own. I was seated in a restaurant, waiting for 2 colleagues to arrive for a celebratory dinner, feeling for the first time in years something that might have been genuine peace, when my phone buzzed on the table. My mother. Not a text this time. A call. I looked at her name on the screen for 3 full seconds. I almost sent it to voicemail. Something I will spend years being quietly grateful that I didn't do. I answered. What she told me in the next 30 seconds made me set my water glass down with a slowness that was entirely involuntary, excuse myself from the table in a voice that must have sounded strange, walk to the restaurant bathroom, and stand completely still in front of a mirror for 4 minutes without making a sound. Because what she said didn't just surprise me. It restructured everything. It reached 9 years back into the past, and changed the shape of a moment I had built an entire identity around. And I was not even close to prepared for what the truth actually was. My mother is not a woman who cries easily. She comes from a generation that considered visible emotion a kind of weakness, and had constructed her entire presentation of self around composure. So when her voice broke on that phone call, when I heard the fracture in it, right there in the first sentence, I knew before she had said anything of substance that this was not a routine call, and that whatever she was about to tell me had been held for a long time. She told me that my father had suffered a heart attack 6 days earlier. He was stable. He was home and recovering. But the scare, she said, the particular terror of watching the person you had built your entire adult life beside suddenly become fragile and finite, had shaken loose something she had kept locked away for nearly a decade. A door she had kept shut because opening it would require admitting things that the family's carefully maintained image had no room for. She needed to tell me the truth about the night I called home asking for help. I held the phone so tightly that my knuckles went pale. She told me that in the 7 days before my phone call, 7 days before my father spoke those words about independence that I had carried like a wound for 9 years, they had received a formal notice from the bank. My parents, who had spent 2 decades carefully constructing a life that looked stable and certain from the outside, were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. My father had been laid off from a company he'd worked at for 15 years. Laid off quietly, without ceremony, in a round of corporate restructuring that he experienced as a kind of personal annihilation. He had not told my mother's family. He had not told his colleagues. He had not, until that moment on the phone with me, told me. He had been moving through the world for 6 months with the weight of that secret compressed inside his chest, surviving on rapidly depleting savings, telling himself every week that something was about to turn around. When I called and asked for financial help that night, my parents were genuinely unable to provide it. Not unwilling. Unable. My father had chosen the language of independence. You figure it out, we raised you to be strong. Not because he didn't care about my situation, but because he could not bring himself to say the true sentence, which was, we cannot help you because we are also drowning and we are too ashamed to say it out loud. Pride. The same wall I had built around my own suffering. The same painted door. It ran in the family in ways none of us had ever been given the language to discuss. My mother was crying fully now, not trying to contain it, telling me that watching me go silent after graduation, watching me succeed in all the ways they could see from a distance, understanding that I had built something real and significant without them, understanding that the distance between us had widened into something that felt permanent, had been a grief she carried quietly, the way our family carried everything. In silence. Separately. Without ever quite acknowledging that the silence itself was the damage. I stood in that restaurant bathroom, and I did not say anything for a long moment. I was recalculating. 9 years of carefully constructed narrative. The story of the girl who was abandoned by her parents at her lowest point and who rose despite them, was shifting its shape in real time, and I didn't have a container ready for what it was becoming. Because the story wasn't that my parents didn't love me enough to help me. The story was that 3 people who loved each other had all been suffering in separate rooms, and none of them had known how to open the door and say I am not okay, and I need you. My father had failed to find those words with me. I had failed to find them with him after graduation. We had all inherited the same silence and called it strength. I flew home 4 days later. My father was thinner than I remembered, slower, with a kind of careful awareness in how he moved that had not been there before. the physical humility of a body that has reminded its owner of its limits. We sat in the kitchen together, the three of us, for the first time in years. And my father said something that I have turned over in my hands almost every day since. He said, "I am proud of you in a way I don't have the right words for. And I am sorry that what I said that night sounded like I didn't care. I was too ashamed to tell you the truth. That was my failure. Not yours. It was not a perfect apology. It didn't undo 9 years of silence or fill in every gap, or make the bathroom floor feel less cold in retrospect. But it was real. It was the most honest thing he had perhaps ever said to me directly. And I found, sitting across from him in that kitchen, that I had more capacity for forgiveness than the armored version of me I had constructed would have predicted. I reached across the table, and I held his hand. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I told my parents about my life. All of it. The blog. The course. The nonprofit partnership. The $14,000 in scholarships. The $4.73 bank account that had started all of it. I watched their faces move through something that was equal parts pride and grief. Pride at what I had built, and a quiet grief for the years of it they had missed because none of us had known how to stay in the room with our own vulnerability long enough to be honest with each other. My mother held both of my hands by the end of it and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "We missed so much." I said, "Yes, but we're here now." And I meant it. Not as a performance of forgiveness. Not because the wound was gone. But because I had spent 9 years building toward a future, and it seemed like a significant waste to arrive there still carrying a past that was now asking to be understood rather than just condemned. What came next, what the following months and years would bring for all three of us, was something none of us could have designed or predicted. But it would begin quietly and imperfectly in that kitchen. And it would become the most unexpected chapter of everything I had built. I am 30 years old now. And I want to tell you what my life actually looks like, because I think the honest version is more useful than the triumphant one. My platform serves over 400,000 people. The financial literacy course has gone through 6 iterations and has been completed by more than 80,000 students across 31 countries. The nonprofit partnership I closed at 27 expanded into a formal curriculum adopted by schools in 14 states, and last year we received federal grant funding to extend it further. I have been featured in publications I once read on the library computers because I couldn't afford a subscription. I speak at conferences. I employ 7 people full-time, all of them first-generation graduates who needed someone to take a chance on their potential. I built all of it from a cracked laptop, a yellow notebook, and a bathroom floor. And my parents are part of my life again in a way that is real and imperfect and deeply meaningful to me. My father's recovery from his heart attack was long and required significant lifestyle adjustments that he approached with the same stubborn determination I apparently inherited. My parents eventually lost the house. That had happened before my mother's call, before any of our conversations, and it had been quietly resolved by downsizing to something more manageable. When I found out the full details, I sat with the information for a week before I asked them if they would allow me to help. Not to take over. Not to rescue them in a way that would make the dynamic unworkable. But to help, the way people who love each other are supposed to be allowed to help each other. My father took 3 days to say yes. Which for him was fast. I did not do it to prove a point. I did not do it to stand in moral superiority over the night they told me to be independent. I did it because I had built something real, and sharing the benefit of it with the people I loved was not weakness. It was the actual point. The thing I had missed while I was so busy proving I didn't need anyone was that independence was never supposed to be the destination. It was supposed to be the foundation. The place you build from so that you eventually have enough to build something larger than yourself. A life that includes other people. A life where the door stays open. My mother and I speak every Sunday now. We talk for a long time. She asks questions about the business that are genuinely curious and not performatively interested, and I answer them in real detail, and sometimes she offers observations that surprise me with their sharpness. My father sends me articles he thinks I would find useful. Last month he sent me a piece about financial policy legislation affecting student loan frameworks, annotated in the margins in his handwriting, little arrows and underlines and question marks, the way a person engages with something they actually care about understanding. I keep it on my desk. Here is what I know now that I did not know at 21, sitting on that cold bathroom floor, waiting for someone to come and make things okay. The people who love you are not always capable of giving you what you need at the moment you need it most. Not because they don't love you, but because love and capacity are two entirely separate things. And sometimes the people you're looking to for rescue are standing in a burning building of their own, trying to hold the door shut so you don't see the smoke. The silence that feels like abandonment is sometimes just shame wearing a familiar face. And the independence you build in the absence of support, real, hard, bone-deep independence, is one of the most powerful things a person can develop. But it must eventually be set down. Not abandoned, not dismantled, but set down long enough to let someone else into the room. Because the version of strength that requires you to need no one is not strength. It is just a very convincing and very lonely performance of it. 9 years ago, my parents told me to be independent. And I was. I was so independent it nearly cost me everything. The relationship, the connection, the years of my life spent building in silence when I could have been building in community with the people who, it turned out, were also just trying to figure it out. The phone call that broke me at 21 was not, it turns out, a story about parents who failed their daughter. It was a story about 3 people who didn't yet have the tools to be honest with each other about their fear, their shame, and their love. And what happened when one of them finally, 9 years later, found the courage to pick up the phone and tell the truth. I'm glad she did. I'm glad I answered. And if you are sitting somewhere right now in your own version of that bathroom floor, $4 in your account, the wall up, the door locked, too proud to ask and too tired to keep pretending, I want you to hear this clearly. The asking is not the failure. The asking is the beginning. What you build from that moment forward will surprise you. And one day, the story of the floor will become something you share not because it broke you, but because of everything it made possible when you decided to rise from it anyway.